Welcome back. In this video, I want to talk to you about motivating sustainable behavior, how tailoring information in different ways can promote both better understanding and action, and how to frame goals as well as motivate and, most importantly, maintain actions. I'll be describing some different theories and providing examples of how motivation can lead to actions related to environmental sustainability. There are a number of different theories we can choose to focus on when trying to understand behavior. And while none are perfect, sometimes adopting one can help explain a process in a much more helpful way than not really having any clear theory at all. So let's start by examining the theory of planned behavior. This theory states that behaviors are the result of intentions. And intentions are essentially commitments or plans to act in a particular way. And our intentions don't just come from nowhere. They're set by several internal and external factors. First, our attitudes or values with regards to a given behavior, the subjective norms about a given behavior, which is basically the cultural and social attitudes we have about the behavior, and then finally, our perceived control over the situation or the behavior. These three precursory factors, attitudes, norms, and control, all help to set our intentions and predict whether or not we will behave in a certain way. Applied to sustainable behavior, we can see the theory at work. Let's take recycling behavior. If you looked at recycling in the 1980s and 90s when I was growing up, you wouldn't see too many people doing it. While it was beginning to become apparent that humans were living unsustainably, much of the focus was on protecting the rainforest and reducing pollution. There was no extra curbside can or pickup of your recyclables. You could recycle, but it meant that you had to know what could be recycled. You had to store it in your own bins and then take it to a recycling center yourself. Applied to the theory of planned behavior, you'd see that while many people had a positive attitude about recycling, there was little normative information because it wasn't something that was visible. There were no ads, there were no signs. You didn't really see other people doing it regularly. In addition to the lack of normative information, we were also limited by, in a sense, a perceived lack of control over the behavior of recycling. It took a lot of time and energy. And so two of these three factors were undercutting our intentions, and subsequently not a lot of people jumped on the recycling wagon. However, if you look at recycling now in most locations, it's second nature because of important changes that were made, in part due to how we understand planned behavior. Messaging about the importance of recycling helped promote positive attitudes. Normative information started to appear everywhere. In schools, on Saturday morning cartoons, in the newspaper, we were being shown how to recycle, by cartoon characters, by our friends, by our teachers. But also what was key was that other people were doing it too. The big push came when cities, businesses, and schools started providing bins and funding recycling pickup. Behavioral control was further promoted with the shift from pre-sorting, or that is sort of dividing up all our recyclables, into what was called single stream, where everything just goes in the bin and it gets sorted elsewhere. This final feature of perceived control, which was so important, is actually often overlooked. We always assume, or we often assume, that if people have a particular attitude, they will act in a particular way, and that some normative pressure might also help us along. But regardless of good intention and pressure from social norms, if we feel we have no control over a situation, then we're likely to do nothing because we assume, due to lack of control, that little will come of our actions. This is especially important when considering climate change because it can feel so much out of our control. Okay, well, if you still want to change people's behaviors, here are some things to remember. One, focus on behaviors that have higher environmental impact. Choosing paper or plastic at the store makes us feel good, but those effects really pale in comparison to making decisions like choosing locally grown food and goods. Number two, intervention should be rooted in theory and supported by available data. So much of what this video is really talking about will be what appears to work and is supported by data. And then 3, while we should definitely measure the effects of interventions, that is outcomes, we should also measure the factors related to the behaviors that we are asking people to undergo that make up the intervention. So for example, knowledge and attitudes about behavior. Knowing this can often help us explain why an intervention does and doesn't work. For example, if an energy company uses an informational campaign about the reasons for reducing energy consumption, but then sees that there's no resulting drop in energy use, the project could be considered a failure, only if we're measuring outcomes. However, the reason for the lack of change could very much be due to the fact that people already possess and are using this knowledge, and that knowing this information would ideally lead to some adjustment in information measurement or messaging to focus on further decreases of use as opposed to raising awareness. In general, providing information is the most widely used form of intervention to promote sustainability, probably because it's pretty inexpensive to implement. And there are really 2 categories of information available when talking about the environment. One is information about environmental issues like sea level rise, data on increasing global average temperatures, images of California wildfires, or the Pacific garbage patch. This is information to raise awareness about issues. There's also information that promotes actions, like how to reduce your carbon footprint, how to lobby your representatives, and how to access alternative transport systems. Regardless of what type of information is being presented, it is rooted in what is the so-called knowledge deficit model. This information model assumes that inaction is due to a lack in one or both of the above information categories. Either you don't know about an issue or you don't know what to do about it. Unfortunately, the research on information provision appears to indicate that it's fairly weak with regards to changing our environmental behaviors. But because it's inexpensive, we tend to use it pretty regularly. Well, you're probably asking the question I want to know is, how do we make it better? And like I mentioned earlier, information works best when it is well tailored to an audience. This sort of information is designed to reach a specific group. For example, telling college students to reduce their electricity bill by turning off devices or shutting off their HVAC systems when they're not in their dorm rooms. Tailoring information works because of a very well-established theory of what's called social learning. Information is best conveyed via a model and the observation of that model carrying out a behavior. If a model is someone that's very similar to a learner, the information is more likely to be accepted and internalized. This idea is based on social learning theory, which was developed in the 1960s by psychologist Albert Bandura. Bandura was interested in how children learn to become aggressive. His famous Bobo doll study, named after the inflatable doll that was used to model aggression, pretty clearly indicated that children learn to be aggressive by watching adults be aggressive. The more aggression they see, and the more similar to the model they are, the more likely they are to adopt the behavior. So 2 concepts from social learning theory can help us promote sustainable behavior, not aggression. The first is normative information. We use normative information when we look to others for how to behave in a particular situation. We watch others to establish what is normal to do in a given place at a given time, especially when we're uncertain how to behave. Here's a great example you might recognize if you've ever stayed in an environmentally conscious hotel. People are more likely to reuse towels in the hotel if they are told that some percentage of the visitors to that whole hotel do the same, that is, save their towels and use them multiple times. The behavior of others carries more weight than a request to change that behavior. So when we compare this message that says a percent of people that attend or percentage of people that come to our hotels reuse their towels versus please reuse your towel, the former is more likely to yield behavioral change because we're paying attention to the model. The second concept, which I also briefly mentioned, is modeling. This is when a familiar or similar other shows us how to do a given behavior. The more familiar And the more like the model is, the more likely the behavior is to stick. This is also similar to what I said before about repeatedly watching people recycle as a kid. Cartoon characters that we liked, famous athletes, Michael Jordan, dunking a plastic bottle in a recycling bin, all made us want to recycle too. So tailoring, modeling, and showing normative consensus all appear to be necessary elaborations to help get information across to people and get that information to stick. Let's now shift from a more passive process of receiving information to promoting actual behavior change. Here I want to talk about goal setting, implementing intentions, commitment, prompting, feedback, and reinforcement of behavior. Lots of topics to go through, but we'll get through all of them. Goal setting is rooted in the idea that people act to move towards attractive and desired goals. They anticipate that a given behavior is going to achieve that goal, and so they're more likely to engage in it. If you believe that buying local and spending more money on higher quality goods so you don't have to replace things over and over again will benefit both you and the planet, you'll likely do that. If you think these behaviors will make little difference for the world, then you won't. So what makes for good goal setting? Well, here's a list. 1, goals should be lofty, but they should be achievable. Maybe you can't take every Friday off for the planet, but maybe you can commit to once a month to make a statement and to take time to do good works that you know need to be done. Goals also need to be clearly formulated. Instead of saying, I want to stop a pipeline from being built, say, I want to increase community awareness, promote a letter writing campaign to the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, and to lobby politicians in affected areas. A study that attempted to test the height and formation of goals compared 2 groups. Both were given detailed information about ways to reduce energy consumption in the home. One group was asked to target a 2% decrease in consumption. The other was asked to target a 20% decrease in consumption. At the close of the study, the 20% group was way more consistently close to their goal of 20%. They were at right about 15%, compared to only a 1% change in the 2% target group. And keep in mind, both groups were given the exact same information about how to reduce energy. It was just one was given a higher goal. The higher the goal, the better the outcome. But the goal has to be something that is doable. Goals also work well when we set them in groups. We just work well in groups. We're a groupish organism. A group with a clear goal often yields more motivated behavior compared to individuals alone by themselves, probably related to some of the social comparison stuff I was mentioning earlier. Finally, goals need to be clear. A behavior strategy that I commonly use with my clients who want to change their behavior is called implementing intentions. Think of a time when you tried to change one of your behaviors. And if you failed to do so, you probably did because something got in the way, you forgot, you weren't sure what to do, or you just didn't know how to do it, or you got overwhelmed. Implementing intentions involves creating a very clear set of goals. A bunch of if-then statements about when, where, why, and how, and what if, and especially the what if is important for a set goal that you want to put in action. By creating this kind of mental map about how to achieve your goal and what to do when you come in contact with the inevitable roadblocks that are going to happen, means that when those things do happen, you've got information to grab onto. You've got behaviors that you know you can engage in. And so you're more likely to then overcome those obstacles. Implementing intentions also works well because it asks people to act from their own values, their own self-generated plans, and to be clear about that process. Now let's talk about commitment. Maybe you've been asked to sign a pledge before, maybe asked to agree to a series of activities rather than a singular event, or you've decided to be in an exclusive romantic relationship. Why do we make commitments and why do they work? Well, recall in the previous video that I talked about cognitive dissonance as an incongruence between attitudes and actions. Commitment can reduce cognitive dissonance by clarifying and making public our beliefs and attitudes. This makes it more difficult to shift those attitudes when we experience dissonance. And the result is that we are more likely to change our behaviors instead of our attitudes. Prompting. Okay, prompting is an easy way to encourage sustainable behavior. It involves short, simple, written, or pictographic messages which draw our attention to behaviors in specific situations. If you've ever seen a keep Northfield clean sign, or keep your town clean, or please recycle, or one of those images of a hand dropping a bottle into a recycling bin, you've seen prompting. Prompting assumes that people already possess positive beliefs about a behavior, but they simply need a little reminder to engage in that behavior. Prompting is shown to be pretty effective in the short term, but sometimes fails in long-term settings because of habituation. That is, we just get used to seeing it over and over again, and so we kind of stop seeing it, or when the desired behavior is too complex to be effectively expressed through the simplicity of the prompting message. Feedback. Feedback is helpful because it allows us to make connections between certain behaviors and specific outcomes. The more frequent the feedback, the better the outcomes. Things like electrical micrometering or counters that count how much of something that you're doing are really excellent ways of providing continuous and clear feedback about sustainable behaviors. Finally, we can't get away with talking about behavior without talking about the theory of behaviorism, learning, and operant conditioning. In short, we do or don't do something according to the consequences of that action. Why'd you take this class? Well, you probably thought you'd get something out of it, and hopefully you are. If somebody had told you that it was a complete waste of time and that you wouldn't learn anything, you probably would have avoided it. We seek out positive consequences that reinforce and lead us to repeat actions. In the same way, we also avoid punishment by reducing undesirable behaviors. This is part of the reason why self-denial and attitudes about environmental austerity rarely take off in any community or group, because these practices are experienced as punishing. This is also why threats don't work well when we're trying to promote behavior. If you want to promote behavior, you have to reinforce it. Give someone a break on their electric bill. Let them win a prize for getting the most signatures on a petition. Show them the happy little owls that get to enjoy the woodland that they donated money to help protect. Setting goals and intentions is only the beginning. We clearly need to be followed and provided with prompts and feedback about how we're doing along the way. And finally, we need to reinforce wise actions now as opposed to later. We all know that the reward of taking care of the earth is a livable future on this planet. But that goal is competing with many other immediate and salient goals. Most people, environmentalists included, can easily lose sight of that. Understanding how to initiate and maintain behaviors is therefore key to living more sustainably.